The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched out like a massive bowl carved from black stone and filled with beings from across the galaxy. Jake Harrison sat in the human section with his hands folded quietly on the table before him. His aide Lisa Morgan tapped her fingers once against her datapad and then stopped. The vote was already over, and everyone in the room knew it. Chancellor Vextar of the Zephyrian Dominion stood at the center podium with his 6 arms spread wide in what his species considered a gesture of finality. His voice carried the mechanical translation that made his clicks and whistles sound like words to the other species present. The human proposal for increased representation had been rejected by a vote of 47 to 12, with 3 abstentions. Jake looked around the chamber at the faces and forms of the various species that made up the council. The crystalline ethereals pulsed with soft blue light in their section, while their harmonic voices hummed in perfect unity about humanity being too emotional for greater responsibility. The aquatic deep guard representatives floated in their water-filled observation tanks and bubbled their agreement that humans lacked the ancient wisdom required for true leadership. The Varian hegemony delegation nodded their scaled heads in approval of the vote, while the smaller species that usually followed their lead did the same. Even the trade-focused merchant collective had voted against the human proposal, despite the fact that human ships carried 60% of all interspecies cargo. Lisa Morgan leaned over and whispered something to Jake, but he already knew what she was going to say. The humans had been asking for this same increase in representation for 20 years. Each time they presented more evidence of their contributions to galactic defense and development. Each time they were told that their contributions were adequate but not exceptional. Chancellor Vextar began speaking again about how the vote reflected the wisdom of the Council and the need to maintain balance among all species. He talked about how representation should be based on age of civilization rather than recent contributions. The Zephyrians had been spacefaring for over 10,000 years, while humans had only joined the galactic community 300 years ago. Jake stood up slowly and the chamber fell quiet. This was not normal. Human representatives usually argued their points for hours after losing a vote. They presented data and made emotional appeals, and sometimes even shouted about fairness. They did not stand calmly and say nothing. Lisa Morgan gathered their materials from the table and placed them in a simple black case. She moved without hurry, and her face showed no anger or frustration. The alien representatives began to murmur among themselves in confusion. Jake Harrison cleared his throat, and his voice carried clearly through the translation systems to every being in the chamber. The words he spoke were simple and direct. The Earth Federation formally withdrew from the Galactic Council effective immediately. All human representatives would be leaving Nexus Prime within 48 hours. Earth would honor existing defense contracts for 60 standard days to allow for proper transition of responsibilities. The chamber erupted into chaos. The ethereal's harmonic singing became discordant as different parts of their collective consciousness tried to process what they had just heard. The Deep Guard began rapid bubbling in their tanks, while the Zephyrians clicked and whistled at frequencies that hurt the ears of species that could hear them. Chancellor Vextar demanded to know what Jake thought he was doing. This was clearly a negotiating tactic, and a poor one at that. Humans needed the galactic economy more than the galaxy needed humans. Earth's colonies depended on Council protection and trade agreements. Jake Harrison picked up his case and walked toward the exit, with Lisa Morgan beside him. He paused at the chamber door and turned back to face the assembly. His voice was calm when he spoke again. The Earth Federation thanked the Council for the opportunity to participate in galactic civilization for 3 centuries. Humanity wished all species well in their future endeavors. The 2 humans left the chamber while alien voices rose behind them in dozens of languages, demanding explanations and threatening consequences. Lisa Morgan activated her communication device as they walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime Station. She sent messages to Admiral Ryan Carter commanding the Human Defense Fleet, and to Chief Science Officer Helen Brooks, who ran the joint research programs, and to Economic Director Paul Adams, who handled trade negotiations. Each message was brief and contained the same basic information. The withdrawal was official and immediate. All human personnel should begin preparing for departure from Council space. No human citizen was required to leave, but transport would be provided for anyone who chose to return to Earth Federation territory. Jake Harrison reached his quarters and began packing his personal belongings. The rooms he had occupied for 5 years were sparse and functional. A few books and some photographs of Earth were all he needed to take with him. The rest belonged to the Council and would stay behind. Lisa Morgan handled the practical details of their departure. She arranged for transport ships and filed the proper paperwork with station administration. The alien bureaucrats who processed the forms kept asking if this was some kind of mistake. Humans did not simply leave. They argued and negotiated and compromised until they found a solution that worked for everyone. By the next morning, word of the human withdrawal had spread throughout Council space. Emergency sessions were called, and ambassadors demanded explanations from their governments. The general assumption was that this was an elaborate bluff designed to force concessions from the Council. Jake Harrison and Lisa Morgan boarded a human transport ship along with 300 other Earth Federation citizens who had been working on Nexus Prime. The ship's captain was named Bill Murphy, and he had been hauling cargo between human and alien worlds for 20 years. He asked Jake if they were really doing this, and Jake told him they were. The transport ship departed Nexus Prime and began its journey back to Earth Federation space. Behind them, the great station continued to orbit its artificial star, and the Galactic Council continued to meet in emergency session. The aliens were certain that the humans would be back within a few weeks asking for readmission to the Council. They were wrong. 3 weeks after the humans left Nexus Prime, the first real problems began to show themselves. Nathan Ross had been the tactical coordinator for the joint military operation against the Korthak Rebellion in the Outer Rim territories. The rebellion had been contained for 2 years using a combination of human strategic planning and alien military forces. When Nathan packed up his equipment and left with his staff of 12 human analysts, the alien commanders thought they could handle the situation on their own. They were wrong about that. The Korthak rebels broke through the containment line on 3 different fronts within days of Nathan's departure. The alien forces fell back on traditional tactics that their species had used for thousands of years. The Zephyrian ships attacked in rigid formations, while the Varian forces used overwhelming firepower against fixed positions. The Aquatic Deep Guard provided support from their specialized vessels. The problem was that the Korthak rebels had been fighting these same alien tactics for years and knew exactly how to counter them. They had only been held in check because Nathan Ross and his team had constantly adapted human strategies to keep the rebels guessing. Without that human flexibility, the alien forces became predictable, and the rebels took advantage of every pattern they recognized. Admiral Kethvar of the Varian hegemony sent urgent messages to the Council demanding to know when the humans would return to their posts. The rebellion was spreading, and 3 star systems were now under threat. Chancellor Vextar responded that the humans were clearly bluffing and would be back soon asking for their jobs. Meanwhile, on the planet New Vega, Dr. Amy Clark was shutting down the terraforming project that had been her life's work for 8 years. The massive atmospheric processors she had designed were being carefully disassembled by her human engineering team. The alien scientists who had been working with her watched in growing panic as the machines that made their impossible project actually work were packed into shipping containers. Dr. Clark's methods had been dismissed by her alien colleagues as crude but functional. They preferred elegant theoretical solutions that looked beautiful in computer simulations. Her atmospheric processors were ugly and complex and used brute force engineering to solve problems that alien science said could not be solved. The alien scientists had never bothered to learn how the human machines actually worked because they assumed they could build better ones when the time came. The terraforming project had been scheduled to complete the atmosphere conversion of New Vega within 2 more years. Without Dr. Clark's processors, the project would take at least 50 years using conventional alien technology. The planet would remain uninhabitable for decades longer than planned, and the millions of colonists waiting to move there would have to find somewhere else to live. Captain Bill Murphy commanded the largest human cargo fleet in Council space, with over 200 ships under his direct control. His fleet handled the complex logistics of moving goods between species that had completely different environmental and cultural requirements. When Bill received orders to withdraw from Council contracts, he began the systematic process of canceling routes and returning cargo to its origin points. The alien species had never developed effective interspecies trade networks because each species naturally focused on their own needs and preferences. The crystalline ethereals produced energy-based goods that required special handling. The aquatic deep guard manufactured items that had to be kept in high-humidity environments. The insectoid hive minds created products in quantities that no single species could use. Humans had become the natural intermediaries in galactic trade because they could understand and adapt to the needs of different species. They built ships with multiple environmental zones and developed packaging systems that could protect delicate alien goods during transport. They even learned enough about alien psychology to negotiate fair prices between species that had trouble communicating with each other. Within weeks of Bill Murphy's withdrawal, the galactic shipping network began to break down. Cargo sat in warehouses because no one knew how to transport it safely between species. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly became impossible to maintain. The economic disruption spread quickly through the outer colonies where most interspecies commerce took place. On Earth, Director Lisa Morgan coordinated a massive humanitarian operation that most of the galaxy was not paying attention to. Human. Ships were arriving at colonies and space stations throughout Council territory, offering free passage to any human citizens who wanted to leave. No one was being forced to go, but many chose to return to Earth Federation space. The operation was running smoothly because humans had always been good at organizing complex logistics on short notice. Lisa had cargo ships picking up families from mining colonies and passenger transports, collecting researchers from science stations. Military vessels provided escort through dangerous regions where pirates or rebels might threaten civilian ships. More surprising to the aliens was that many non-human residents of human colonies and stations requested passage as well. These were aliens who had chosen to live and work in human space and had come to prefer human society to their own species' traditional cultures. Lisa's ships welcomed them aboard without question or bureaucratic delays. The Varian ambassador. Thelnox arrived at Earth expecting to find humans angry and desperate to negotiate their return to the Council. Instead, he found Director Paul Adams busy restructuring human trade networks to focus on Earth Federation colonies and the growing refugee population. Paul explained politely that Earth no longer needed Council trade agreements because human space was economically self-sufficient. Thelnox demanded to know how humans could abandon their responsibilities to galactic civilization. Paul responded that humans had never abandoned their responsibilities, but had simply redirected them toward people who actually wanted human help. The refugee aliens who had chosen to join Earth Federation space were being integrated into human society with jobs and homes and full citizenship rights. Admiral Ryan Carter was restructuring the human defense fleet into a more efficient configuration now that it no longer had to coordinate with alien military forces. Human ships that had been scattered across Council space in joint operations were being recalled and reorganized into task forces designed specifically for defending Earth Federation territory and trade routes. Dr. Helen Brooks was excited about finally having resources to pursue what she called purely human research projects. For decades, human scientists had been required to share all their discoveries with the Council and to focus on projects that benefited multiple species. Now they could investigate questions that interested humans specifically and develop technologies designed for human needs. The aliens began to realize that humans were not acting like a junior partner that had been unfairly treated. They were acting like a senior partner that had decided to start their own company. This was much more frightening than angry humans demanding better treatment. These humans were calm and productive and completely focused on building something new rather than fixing something old. Ambassador Thelnox returned to the Council with a report that terrified the alien leadership. The humans were not bluffing, and they were not desperate. They were thriving without the Council and showed no interest in returning to their former positions. Earth Federation space was becoming more prosperous and more secure every day, while Council space struggled with problems that humans had been quietly solving for decades. Chancellor Vextar refused to believe the report and insisted that humans would return once their economy began to suffer from isolation. But the economic data showed that human trade had simply reorganized around Earth's extensive colonial network. Humans were not suffering from their withdrawal from Council space. They were benefiting from it. 6 weeks after the humans departed from Council space, the real scope of the problem became clear to everyone. Chief Engineer Roy Bennett and his maintenance crew of 47 humans had just completed their final contracts on Nexus Prime Station and were preparing to leave. The station administrators had always taken the human maintenance staff for granted because they worked quietly and efficiently without drawing attention to themselves. Nexus Prime was a marvel of galactic engineering that combined technologies from 12 different species into a single functioning space station. The fusion reactors were Zephyrian designs, while the gravity generators used ethereal crystal matrices. The life support systems were adapted from deep-guard underwater habitats, and the hull plating incorporated Varian metallurgy techniques. Each system was individually excellent, but they had never been designed to work together. Roy Bennett had spent 15 years learning how to make all these different technologies communicate with each other. His crew understood the delicate balance required to keep 12 different engineering philosophies functioning as a unified whole. When they left Nexus Prime, the station administrators discovered that no single alien species understood the complete system. The Zephyrian engineers knew their reactors perfectly, but had no idea how to interface them with ethereal crystals. The ethereal technicians could maintain their gravity generators, but could not adapt them to work with deep-guard environmental controls. Each species had deep knowledge of their own technology, but no understanding of how it connected to everything else. Within days of Roy Bennett's departure, critical systems began failing throughout the station. The environmental controls started producing atmospheric mixtures that were toxic to some species and insufficient for others. The gravity fluctuated between crushing pressure and weightlessness without warning. Power distribution became erratic, as different systems drew energy in ways the central reactors were not designed to handle. Emergency repair crews from multiple species worked frantically to solve problems they did not understand. They could fix individual components, but could not figure out how those components were supposed to interact with the rest of the station. The elegant integration that Roy Bennett had maintained for years fell apart in a matter of weeks. The crystalline ethereals faced their own crisis when their galactic computational network began experiencing cascade failures. Katie Walsh had been a human programmer working on interface protocols that allowed different species' computer systems to communicate with each other. The ethereals had considered her work interesting but non-essential because their own crystal-based computers were obviously superior to any other technology. What they had not realized was that Katie's interface protocols were the only thing, allowing their crystal networks to share data with the computers used by other species. Without her regular updates, the different systems began defaulting to incompatible operating parameters. The ethereal collective consciousness depended on perfect information sharing, but now their thoughts were being corrupted by translation errors and data gaps. The harmonic singing that connected all ethereal minds across the galaxy began to develop, disturbing discord as different crystal nodes tried to process information in ways that no longer matched their neighbors. Parts of the collective began to fragment as groups of ethereals found themselves unable to maintain mental contact with the larger community. In the Outer Rim territories, a new threat emerged that made the Korthak Rebellion look like a minor inconvenience. The Savage Tide was a mysterious space phenomenon that consumed energy from any source it encountered. Entire solar systems had been drained of power and left as dead zones where nothing could survive. Dr. Sam Turner had been studying the Savage Tide for 3 years and developing countermeasures that could protect planets and space stations from its effects. His research had been funded by the Council, but given low priority because the phenomenon only affected remote areas that most species considered expendable. The aliens had found his work interesting, but not urgent enough to deserve major resources. Now the Savage Tide was expanding faster than anyone had predicted and moving toward populated systems. Dr. Turner's countermeasures were the only known defense against the phenomenon, but he had returned to Earth with his research data when the humans withdrew from Council space. The aliens who had dismissed his work as non-essential suddenly realized they needed his expertise desperately. 12 colonies in the Outer Rim went dark as the Savage Tide consumed their energy sources. Millions of aliens were evacuated from their homes while Council fleets tried unsuccessfully to contain the spreading phenomenon. Without Dr. Turner's countermeasures, they could only watch helplessly as entire worlds became uninhabitable. Captain Jenny Hayes commanded a human evacuation fleet that was moving through Council space offering free transport to any human citizens who wanted to leave. Her ships also carried applications for any aliens who wished to immigrate to Earth Federation territory. The application process was surprisingly simple compared to the complex bureaucracy that the Council used for similar procedures. Jenny noticed that many of the aliens requesting passage had worked closely with humans in joint projects and had come to prefer human working methods. They talked about how humans focused on practical solutions rather than theoretical perfection. They appreciated the way humans treated all species as equals rather than ranking them by age of civilization or technological advancement. Commander Alex Moore led the final withdrawal of human personnel from the Galactic Defense Academy on Terminus Station. For 60 years, human instructors had taught alien cadets the principles of adaptive tactics and innovative engineering. The Academy was considered the finest military training facility in the galaxy, and graduation from its programs guaranteed rapid promotion in any species' defense forces. The remaining alien instructors discovered that they could teach theory and standard procedures, but they could not teach the human approach to creative problem-solving. Human military doctrine emphasized flexibility and adaptation, while alien training focused on perfecting established tactics. The Academy cadets had learned their most valuable skills from human instructors who could think outside the boundaries of traditional military thinking. Without human faculty, the Academy continued to operate, but its graduates were noticeably less effective than previous classes. They could execute standard battle plans competently, but they struggled when faced with unexpected situations that required innovative responses. The quality of galactic military leadership began to decline rapidly. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council became daily occurrences as crisis reports flooded in from across Council space. The Korthak Rebellion had overwhelmed 3 star systems and was threatening 6 more. The Savage Tide had consumed 12 colonies and showed no signs of slowing down. Critical infrastructure was failing on space stations throughout the galaxy. Chancellor Vextar continued to insist that the humans were bluffing and would return when they realized how much they needed the galactic economy. But economic reports showed that Earth Federation space was more prosperous than ever. Human colonies were expanding rapidly as refugees from Council space brought new skills and perspectives to Earth communities. The Council sent diplomatic missions to Earth requesting emergency assistance with the various crises. The human government responded politely that Earth would be happy to provide humanitarian aid to any species that requested it, but would not resume political relationships with the Council. Help would be offered freely, but without conditions or expectations of political concessions. This response confused the alien diplomats who were accustomed to using crisis situations as opportunities for political leverage. Humans seemed genuinely interested in helping solve problems without gaining political advantage from their assistance. They offered refugee support and emergency supplies, but showed no interest in using the Council's desperation to force a return to their previous relationship. The aliens began to understand that humans had not left the Council because they were angry or frustrated. They had left because they had found a better way to organize galactic civilization and wanted to build something new rather than repair something that was fundamentally broken. This realization was more frightening than any threat the Council had ever faced. 2 months after humanity's departure, the first major catastrophe struck the galaxy in a way that no one could ignore. The Korthak rebellion had grown from a contained regional conflict into a devastating war that overwhelmed 3 entire star systems. The rebel forces used tactics that the Council military forces could not counter effectively because they no longer had human strategic coordination. Admiral Kethvar of the Varian hegemony commanded the largest fleet ever assembled by the Council, but found himself losing battles against rebel forces that should have been easily defeated. Each species in his fleet operated according to their own tactical doctrines and communication protocols. The Zephyrian ships attacked in precise geometric formations, while the Deep Guard vessels used swarm tactics adapted from underwater combat. Without human tactical coordinators to translate between different military philosophies, the multi-species fleets could not function as unified forces. Orders were misunderstood and timing was constantly off as ships tried to coordinate maneuvers that made sense to their own species but confused their allies. The rebels exploited every miscommunication and tactical disconnect. Dr. Ben Foster had returned to Earth when the humans withdrew and was now working freely on his research into the Savage Tide phenomenon. Without Council restrictions and bureaucratic oversight, he was able to pursue investigations that had been blocked for years. His complete findings were published in an open research paper that was freely available to all species. The paper revealed that the Savage Tide was not a natural phenomenon, but the result of ancient experiments conducted by a long-extinct civilization. More importantly, Dr. Foster had developed a series of countermeasures that could stop the tide's advance and even reverse its effects in some cases. The technology required for implementing his solutions was within the capabilities of current galactic civilization. The problem was that Dr. Foster's countermeasures required interdisciplinary cooperation between multiple fields of science that alien researchers typically kept separate. Human scientists naturally worked across species, boundaries, and combined different approaches to solve complex problems. Alien scientists usually stayed within their own species' methodologies and rarely collaborated with fundamentally different ways of thinking. The Council assembled teams of their best scientists to implement Dr. Foster's countermeasures, but found that they could not make the different approaches work together effectively. Zephyrian energy manipulation techniques were incompatible with ethereal crystal programming methods. Deep Guard biological solutions could not interface with Varian mechanical engineering systems. Dr. Foster's research was publicly available, but the practical knowledge needed to make it work had left with the human scientists who understood how to bridge the gaps between different species' technologies. The aliens could read the theory, but they could not implement the practice. The galactic communication network that had connected hundreds of worlds for centuries began to degrade rapidly. Technical specialist Carol Long had maintained the complex translation algorithms that allowed real-time communication between species with fundamentally different language structures. Her work had been invisible to most users, but absolutely essential for the network to function. Without Carol's regular updates, the translation systems began losing accuracy and nuance. Simple concepts could still be communicated, but complex ideas became garbled or completely misunderstood. Scientific discussions became impossible when technical terms were translated incorrectly. Diplomatic negotiations failed when subtle meanings were lost in translation. The breakdown in communication made every other problem worse. Military coordination became even more difficult when orders were mistranslated. Scientific cooperation failed when researchers could not explain their methods clearly. Trade negotiations collapsed when the meaning of contracts became unclear. On Earth, Director Paul Adams oversaw the construction of massive new facilities designed to handle the influx of refugees from Council space. Human engineering focused on practical solutions that could be built quickly and efficiently. The new settlements were not as elegant as alien architecture, but they provided comfortable homes for millions of beings from dozens of different species. Earth Federation space proved far more efficient than anyone had expected now that it was consolidated under unified human administration. Without the bureaucratic delays of council oversight, human colonies underwent rapid development. Projects that would have taken years to approve through council procedures were completed in months. Ambassador Jake Harrison published humanity's new charter for what was now called the Human Confederation. The document outlined a system of government based on cooperation and innovation rather than hierarchy and tradition. Any species or individual could join the Confederation if they agreed to principles of mutual respect and shared responsibility. The charter was remarkably simple compared to the thousands of pages of regulations that governed council membership. Human government focused on practical results rather than theoretical perfection. Laws were written to solve problems rather than maintain traditional power structures. Captain Zix Nala of the Deep Guard watched her fleet struggle against pirates, who had never been a significant threat when humans provided tactical support. The pirates used simple hit-and-run tactics that should have been easy to counter, but Zix Nala's forces could not adapt quickly enough to changing situations. Deep Guard. Military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force applied according to predetermined battle plans. Human advisors had provided the flexibility and creativity needed to deal with unpredictable enemies. Without that human input, Zix Nala found herself losing ships to opponents who should have been vastly outmatched. The crystalline, ethereal, designated 977 observed their collective consciousness, experiencing growing computational errors and communication failures. The harmonic frequencies that connected ethereal minds across space were becoming discordant as different nodes fell out of synchronization with each other. 977 began to fear the complete dissolution of ethereal collective consciousness. Their species had evolved as a unified mental entity, but now faced the possibility of fragmenting into isolated individuals who could not maintain contact with their larger community. The elegant perfection of ethereal thought was collapsing without the interface protocols that Katie Walsh had maintained. Chief Scientist Mortuck of the Zephyrian Dominion made a discovery that terrified him more than any military defeat or natural disaster. He had been reviewing 60 years of galactic technological development and realized that virtually every major breakthrough had involved human participation in some way. It was not that alien species could not innovate on their own, but that humans uniquely combined ideas across species boundaries in ways that no single species could achieve alone. Humans had been the catalyst that enabled galactic progress by connecting different approaches and translating between incompatible methodologies. Mortuck's analysis showed that the rate of technological advancement had already begun to slow significantly in the 2 months since human withdrawal. Without human scientists to bridge the gaps between different species' research methods, the pace of discovery was returning to pre-contact levels when each species worked in isolation. The Galactic Council faced a realization that challenged everything they believed about their own civilization. They had assumed that humans were junior partners who contributed labor and resources, while alien species provided wisdom and leadership. The truth was that humans had been senior partners who enabled galactic civilization to function while allowing aliens to believe they were in charge. Emergency sessions continued daily, but the Council could no longer deny the scope of the crisis they faced. Every major system that kept galactic civilization running was failing without human maintenance and coordination. The humans had not been participants in galactic society, but rather the foundation that made it possible. Chancellor Vexatar, finally, admitted that the humans were not bluffing and would not return voluntarily. The Council began discussing desperate measures, including military action to force human cooperation. The irony was lost on most Council members that they were planning to use force against the only species that could solve their problems peacefully. 3 months after humanity's departure, the Galactic Council faced complete systemic failure across every aspect of their civilization. The Korthak Rebellion had consumed 8 star systems and was advancing toward the core worlds with unstoppable momentum. The Savage Tide had claimed 12 colonies and showed no signs of slowing its expansion toward populated sectors. Communication between Council members now required hours of clarification for even basic concepts. 3 separate economic crises rippled through different regions as trade networks collapsed and infrastructure failed. The elegant interdependence that had connected hundreds of worlds for centuries was falling apart without the human coordination that had made it all possible. Millions of beings were becoming refugees as their worlds became uninhabitable or unsafe. In desperation, Chancellor Vextar called for the most extreme measure in Council history. Operation Recall would send a military fleet to Earth, demanding humanity's return for the good of galactic civilization. The operation was justified as a humanitarian mission to save billions of lives throughout the galaxy. Admiral Kethvar of the Varian Hegemony was chosen to lead Operation Recall with a EOS fleet of 200 ships representing every major species in the Council. The fleet included the newest and most powerful vessels available with weapon systems designed to overwhelm any possible resistance. The assumption was that humans would surrender immediately when faced with such overwhelming force. The fleet departed Nexus Prime with great ceremony as Council leaders declared that they were saving galactic civilization from human selfishness. News broadcasts throughout Council space portrayed the mission as a rescue operation that would restore order and prosperity to the galaxy. The humans were depicted as irresponsible children who needed to be forced to accept their obligations. Admiral Kethvar expected to find Earth's system defended by the scattered remnants of human military forces that had withdrawn from Council space. Intelligence reports suggested that Admiral Ryan Carter had perhaps 50 ships available for defense. The Council fleet should have been able to overwhelm any resistance easily. Instead, they found Earth's solar system protected by a defensive network unlike anything they had seen before. Admiral Carter's fleet was smaller than expected, but operated with precision and coordination that made the Council's multi-species forces look clumsy by comparison. Human ships moved in perfect formation while their weapons targeted Council vessels with accuracy that should have been impossible. More surprising was the presence of defensive squadrons composed of ships from various alien species who had chosen to immigrate to human space. Former Council citizens now fought alongside human forces to protect their new home. These mixed crews operated with the same efficiency as purely human units because they had adopted human methods of cooperation and coordination. The confrontation began when Admiral Kethvar demanded that Earth surrender and return to Council authority. Admiral Carter responded calmly that Earth Federation space was now closed to Council jurisdiction and that any Council ships attempting to enter the system Without permission would be considered hostile. The human fleet took defensive positions but did not attack. 3 Council scouts ignored the warning and attempted to penetrate Earth's defensive perimeter. They were disabled within seconds by precisely targeted weapons that the Council had never seen before. The scout ships were not destroyed but left completely powerless and helpless. Rescue shuttles from the human fleet immediately moved to assist the disabled crews. Captain Linda Price commanded Earth's orbital defense platforms and provided a demonstration that shocked the Council fleet. The platforms revealed weapon systems that were decades ahead of anything the Council possessed. Energy beams cut through space with perfect accuracy, while defensive shields deflected return fire effortlessly. Linda explained to the stunned Council forces that humans had never shared their best technology with the Council. They had been providing appropriate technology that met galactic needs without revealing the full extent of human scientific advancement. Human engineering had always been constrained by Council restrictions and alien prejudices rather than technological limitations. The Council fleet found itself completely outmatched by defensive systems that seemed almost magical in their effectiveness. Human ships moved faster and hit harder than should have been possible. Their shields were impenetrable, and their weapons were devastatingly precise. The technological gap between human and alien capabilities was far larger than anyone had imagined. Admiral Kethavar realized that his fleet could not force entry into Earth's system without suffering catastrophic losses. Even if they succeeded in penetrating the defenses, they would face ground-based weapons that were probably even more advanced than the space-based systems. The humans had been hiding their true military capabilities for decades. More disturbing was the discovery that Earth appeared more prosperous than ever before. Long-range sensors showed massive construction projects and thriving colonies throughout the solar system. The planet itself was surrounded by orbital habitats that housed millions of beings from dozens of species. This was not the desperate humanity that the Council had expected to find. Captain Jenny Hayes met with Admiral Kethavar under a flag of truce to explain the situation from the human perspective. Earth Federation space now included over 200 worlds and stations with a population that was growing rapidly as refugees from Council space continued to arrive. The Human Confederation offered security and prosperity that the Council could no longer provide. Jenny explained that humans bore no ill will toward any species, but would not return to the Council system that had consistently undervalued their contributions. The Confederation was open to diplomatic relationships with individual species, but would not submit to Council authority again. Earth would continue to provide humanitarian aid to any beings who needed it, but without political conditions. The Rear Council fleet retreated in confusion and shame. This was not the desperate humanity they had been told to expect. Earth had become the center of a new galactic civilization that was more prosperous and secure than anything the Council had ever achieved. The humans had not needed the Council at all, and were proving that galactic society could function better without traditional alien leadership. Back on Nexus Prime, the Council faced the ultimate humiliation of their failed military operation. Their most powerful fleet had been turned away without firing a shot by human defenses that made Council technology look primitive. The demonstration of human military superiority had been broadcast throughout Council space and could not be hidden or explained away. Emergency sessions became desperate planning meetings as Council leaders tried to find some way to force human cooperation. Economic sanctions were meaningless against a civilization that was economically independent. Military action had proven hopeless against superior human technology. Diplomatic pressure was useless when humans simply ignored Council authority. The revelation that humans had been holding back their true capabilities for centuries raised uncomfortable questions about everything the Council thought they knew about galactic civilization. If humans were this advanced, why had they accepted junior status for so long? The answer was becoming clear to everyone who was willing to face the truth. Humans had not been junior partners because they lacked capability, but because they preferred cooperation to domination. They had shared appropriate technology rather than advanced technology because they wanted to help other species develop rather than become dependent. They had accepted secondary roles because they were more interested in results than recognition. The Council had spent centuries believing that they were the senior partners in galactic civilization while humans did the actual work of making everything function. Now they faced the reality that humans had been the foundation that supported everything else, and without that foundation, galactic society was collapsing rapidly. Chancellor Vextar finally admitted what many council members had already realized, privately. The humans were not coming back, and the council could not force them to return. Galactic civilization, as they had known it, was ending, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. 6 months after humanity's departure from the Galactic Council, the old order had completely collapsed, and a new galactic civilization was emerging from its ruins. The Council itself had effectively dissolved as member species withdrew into isolated groups or attempted to negotiate independent agreements with the Human Confederation. The great dream of unified galactic government had ended not with war or rebellion, but with quiet abandonment. The crystalline ethereals had retreated into isolated computational clusters where they struggled to maintain their collective consciousness, without the interface protocols that humans had provided. Their harmonic singing had become fragmented and discordant as different groups lost contact with the larger community. Some ethereal clusters had begun experimenting with human-designed communication systems in desperate attempts to restore their unity. The aquatic deep guard had withdrawn to their ocean worlds, where they faced the reality that their military forces could no longer operate effectively without human tactical coordination. Their proud fleets had been reduced to defending their home systems against pirates and raiders who had never been a serious threat when humans provided strategic support. The Zephyrian Dominion had fragmented into competing factions as different regions adopted different approaches to the crisis. Some Zephyrian groups attempted to maintain traditional isolation, while others sought to join the Human Confederation. The species that had been most vocal about human inadequacy was now desperately trying to learn human methods of organization and cooperation. The various minor species either collapsed into isolationism or made individual requests to join human space. The Grand Alliance that had governed the galaxy for centuries had dissolved into dozens of separate groups with no central authority or coordination. The council chambers on Nexus Prime stood empty, while the station itself struggled with infrastructure, failures that no one knew how to repair. Meanwhile, the Human Confederation had become the de facto galactic power through competence and cooperation rather than conquest or coercion. Human space now included over 300 worlds and stations, with a population that was growing rapidly as more refugees arrived from the collapsed Council territories. The Confederation offered aid and assistance to struggling alien communities, without political conditions or expectations of submission. Dr. Helen Brooks led massive disaster relief efforts for worlds affected by the Savage Tide using the countermeasures that Dr. Ben Foster had developed. Human ships delivered the necessary equipment, and human engineers worked alongside alien technicians to implement the solutions. The spreading disaster was contained and reversed in many areas through freely shared human technology and expertise. Ambassador Jake Harrison had established the Open Worlds Protocol that allowed any species or individual to join human space, based on simple principles of cooperation and mutual respect. Unlike the Council's complex hierarchy of species rankings and ancient privileges, the human system was elegantly straightforward. Contributors were welcomed regardless of their species' age or traditional status. The immigration process was remarkably efficient compared to Council bureaucracy. Aliens who had been waiting years for Council citizenship could become Confederation citizens within weeks. The only requirements were agreement to respect the rights of other beings and willingness to contribute to the common good according to individual abilities and circumstances. Captain Zixanala of the Deep Guard had brought her entire fleet to serve with Admiral Ryan Carter after her people's military command structure collapsed. She discovered that humans treated alien tactical traditions with genuine respect while teaching adaptive strategies that made mixed-species crews more effective than mono-species forces had ever been. Working with human military advisors, Zix Nala learned to combine deep guard swarm tactics with human flexibility to create new approaches that were superior to either species' traditional methods. Her mixed crews operated with efficiency that amazed observers who had assumed that interspecies cooperation was inherently problematic. The ethereal, designated 977, had made the difficult decision to separate from its fragmenting collective and integrate its consciousness with human computational networks. The experience was initially terrifying for a being that had never existed as an individual, but 977 discovered that diversity of thought strengthened rather than weakened collective intelligence. Human computer systems used distributed processing methods that allowed multiple thinking patterns to coexist and interact without forcing conformity. 977 found that working with human programmers and alien researchers from other species produced insights that the ethereal collective had never achieved through harmonic unity alone. Former Council Chancellor Vextar made a personal pilgrimage to Earth seeking to understand how humanity had so thoroughly outmaneuvered the Council without anyone realizing what was happening. He expected to find humans celebrating their victory over alien arrogance, but instead discovered a society focused on building something better rather than proving superiority. Director Lisa Morgan met with Vextar and explained the human perspective, with patience and clarity. Humans had never wanted to rule the galaxy or prove their dominance over other species. They had simply wanted to be treated as equals and allowed to contribute their abilities to galactic civilization. When the Council made it clear that would never happen, humans had decided to create their own version of galactic society. Vextar asked why humans had hidden their true capabilities for so long, and Lisa responded that humans had not been hiding anything, but rather sharing appropriate technology and knowledge. Humans believed in helping other species develop their own abilities, rather than creating dependence on human superiority. The goal had always been cooperation, rather than domination. The revelation was humbling for Vextar, who had spent his career believing that Zephyrian wisdom and experience made his species natural leaders of galactic civilization. The truth was that humans had been leading through competence and cooperation while allowing aliens to maintain the illusion of authority. When that illusion became too costly to maintain, humans had simply walked away. The transformation of galactic civilization was celebrated at a massive festival on New Terra, the capital world of human space. Representatives from dozens of species attended not as council delegates but as citizens of a new kind of galactic community. The festival celebrated diversity and cooperation rather than hierarchy and tradition. Admiral Ryan Carter noted that the galaxy was more peaceful now than it had been in centuries, despite the initial chaos of the Council's collapse. The human Confederation's approach to conflict resolution emphasized mediation and practical solutions rather than military force and political dominance. Disputes were resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than superior firepower. Dr. Amy Clark reported that terraforming and development projects were proceeding faster than ever before without council oversight and bureaucratic restrictions. Human engineering focused on practical results rather than theoretical elegance, and alien communities were learning to adopt human methods that actually worked rather than maintaining traditional approaches that looked good but failed in practice. Captain Jenny Hayes commanded mixed-species crews that functioned better than the old monospecies fleets had ever achieved. Humans had learned to combine the best aspects of different species' abilities while teaching everyone to work together effectively. The diversity that the Council had seen as a source of weakness had become the Confederation's greatest strength. The final scene showed Jake Harrison looking out at the stars from New Terra's observation deck, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy who had chosen to join human civilization. He reflected that humanity had never wanted to conquer the galaxy or prove their superiority over other species. They had simply wanted to build something better than what existed before. The old galactic civilization had been based on ancient hierarchies and traditional privileges that prevented real cooperation between species. The new civilization was based on practical cooperation and mutual respect that allowed everyone to contribute their best abilities to shared goals. The galaxy had not ended when humans departed calmly from the council chambers. It had finally begun to reach its true potential.